Brilliant. Shall we move on to our main topic, Dave?
Yes, I think we should.
Right. Tonight's topic, folks, as you know, is the writer Mark Gatiss, part of an irregular series we've done on Doctor Who writers over the years. Dave, why did we pick Mark Gatiss?
Well, look, as you said, Rob, we have over the years done a couple of other writers. We started off with Terry Nation, and I thought that was a really good exploration of his work. We've done another classic writer as well. And we thought, look, you know what, we probably should do a new series writer. That would be a good thing to balance things out now. And we really can't do one of the three showrunners because you'd be here for half the next 4 hours trying to do all their episodes, but also, they're showrunners. It's a whole different conversation.
Yeah.
And so we had to look at who are the writers that have done a nice body of new series work that we can look at. And Mark Gatiss is the obvious standout there. He's written 9 episodes of the series across 4 Doctors, which is a pretty huge contribution. So there's a lot to talk about. Mm-hmm. But the other thing that really got him over the line, I think, for both of us, is this theory we've both had for a long time that everybody loves half of Mark Gatiss's episodes and hates half of Mark Gatiss's episodes, but no one can agree on which half is which.
Very true. Very true.
So as a bit of exercise, we thought, look, we'll go through, we'll see how our views on his episodes have changed, what we think of his writing, and at the end of this, we're each going to give a top 3 and bottom 3 and see how many snaps we have or not.
Yes. Dave, would you like to take lead or shall I?
Well, look, I might just give us a little bit of a prelude because between us choosing this topic last month and recording tonight, I have read his 2 missing adventures.
Oh, that's dedication. I haven't.
Yeah, look, I really sort of just wanted an excuse to read Nightshade because I haven't read it for quite a long time and it's a favourite of mine.
Right.
And rereading it again, I was just reminded of what an absolutely excellent book that is. It's a proper page turner, and when you read Gatiss's Nightshade, which is the first professional contribution he made to Doctor Who fairly early on in the range, I think it's the 8th book in the New Adventures range and the first standalone, it feels like the Doctor Who story a Doctor Who fan has wanted to write for many, many years. And in their mind, they've been going, I would do this, and I'd have this, and I'd set it here, and I'd have an English village, and I'll do it in the 50s, and all the rest of it. And it's really, really effective. The Seventh Doctor's great in it. Ace is great in it. It's a lovely book, and it just works really, really well. And so that was really enjoyable. Very clear from the start that Gatiss is a fan of horror. High body count, lots of nasty deaths. I suspect that's a theme we're going to be coming back to a bit across the course of this episode. Mm-hmm. And then I read St. Anthony's Fire, which I had no memory of at all, and asking around, and when I mentioned this on Twitter, no one else had any memories of this one at all.
I don't know either of these books. I own them. They're on the shelf just over there, but I have not read either of them, so tell me what you can.
Yeah, so St. Anthony's Fire was written a few years later in 1994. It's about halfway through the range, and it starts off really, really well. It has a proper alien world of Patricia, which has lizard people on it, and these lizard people have a proper society, and they go around their businesses as lizard people, doing lizard people things, and there's a civil war on the planet, and it's set in a jungle, and Gatiss takes a while to really create a really interesting world, and it takes a little bit to kind of get your mind around all these characters with weird lizard people names and weird lizard people ranks and weird lizard people job titles. Right, but once you sort of get that all sort of is sorted in your mind, it's a really good sort of alien society that he sets up, and he throws the Doctor and Benny into it, and that's really interesting. The first 100 pages, I was really excited. I thought, why isn't this mentioning more people's lists of good Doctor Who, good New Adventures? Then he brings in the other thread, which is the chapter of St. Anthony's Fire, a sort of a religious cult that goes around the galaxy being ultra-religious to people. Oh. And it's very clear that Gatiss is trying to make a point, and it's very clear that Gatiss is really sort of giving his views on organised religion and all that sort of thing. And look, are
they missionaries or something, or are they like the Inquisition? Or
yeah, they're more like the Inquisition than they are friendly missionaries. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and so all that sort of gets thrown in. Then there's a whole third element of an evil from the dawn of time that sort of comes along because it's a McCoy story, so of course there's an evil from the dawn of time. And look, I enjoyed it more than I expected. I think it's better than its reputation suggests. It doesn't quite have the coherence of the, oh my god, this is the first Doctor Who story I've ever written, and I've been thinking about this for 10 years and it's perfect. The same as Paul Cornell's Revelation or Gareth Roberts' Higher Science. Like, they feel like the story they've always wanted to write.
Yeah.
This feels like the, well, what's my second book going to be? I'm going to do this. and so, look, there's a lot of good writing in it. I did want to know what happens next. It wasn't a chore to read. I did enjoy it. It's certainly weaker, though, and I think his desire to insert the author's message into the second half of the book does detract from the second half of the book. I don't have a problem with messages in Doctor Who. I don't have a problem with politics in Doctor Who and themes in Doctor Who. I think, as we've discussed before, particularly with the Chibnall era, when it's kind of comes with a great big stamp that says author's message here, that I think, look, in any fiction, frankly, I think that always detracts.
Yeah, it certainly does. So a 50-50 hit rate there, Dave.
A 50-50 hit rate there. Look, nothing I hated, but one was excellent, one was not.
Shall we get on to the TV episodes?
We shall. So look, I've waxed a bit about his new adventures, but let's bring you in, Rob. Do you want to do number one? Yeah,
look, obviously everyone knows he kicks off in Doctor Who proper, Doctor Who on telly, with the Unquiet Dead back in 2005. And I've got to say, I was really happy with this story back in 2005, and I still like it now. We'd had a modern day story, which was all right, and then we had a sci-fi adventure that I wasn't blown away by. And then Gatiss pulled this out of the hat, and it was spooky, it had an historic flavour, and I was thinking, yes, this is Doctor Who, or at least what Doctor Who can be and what appeals to me. So before we get to Dalek in story number 6 in that series, which is where many people say, oh, look, the series really takes off from there.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
I think this is an early signpost that the series is in good hands. It certainly made me feel very hopeful, so that even though the next 2 episodes, Aliens of London and World War III, are stories I didn't really like at the time, and I like even less now, I knew the series was capable because of this story. So this is in the good side of the ledger for me.
Yeah, I have similar views, certainly in my approach to the story. Mm-hmm. I think that when I watched it again, and this would be probably the 4th time I've watched it, and the last time would have been when we did our Series 1 deep dive a few years ago. Mm-hmm. So I haven't watched it for a little bit, but I have seen it a couple of times. It does feel, in my view, quite encumbered by the fact that it's part of that opening triptych of stories. As you said, we get the present story, the future story, the past story.
Yeah.
So that new fans to the show get an idea of what Doctor Who can be and the sort of the different styles and the like, which is really good. But it certainly to me feels like a jumping on story, which is what it was.
Yeah.
And I think it does that job really, really well. It's harder for me to enjoy it as a piece of television in its own right. I think it has to be simple because it is that very safe jumping on. That said, it's a very coherent story. It works well. It's very well cast. Gatiss's love for the macabre is on display very quickly here. In fact, let's be honest, before the opening titles is on, we have a corpse walking around, which I think is, in hindsight, Gatiss is putting a very big marker down as to the sort of writer he wants to be.
Yeah.
So look, I enjoyed it. I didn't think it was all that much, but I'm not knocking it back for that because it's doing a job it had to do, and I think it can't be divorced from that.
Whereas I'll put my hand up now and say that maybe like Gatiss, I quite enjoy the Victorian era Talons of Wang Chiang. Put Doctor Who in that sort of era and I'm there. And I think Gatiss is probably the same kind of guy. So I think it tickled the same sense for me that I think it tickles in him.
Yeah, that's actually very possible because it's not an era that particularly tickles me. I'm not a particular fan of Sherlock Holmes, for example, and that sort of era. So maybe there was something sort of, as you say, sort of latching on to your sensibilities a bit more than it did to me.
Yeah.
That's very possible because I think it did it very well. It just wasn't something I've gone, oh my God, this is for me. Should we mention the Mad Larry comments on this one that were quite a big deal at the time?
Oh, I think contractually we have to.
I think we do, and this is a very famous case for listeners who haven't heard of. Lawrence Miles, or Mad Larry, as he's known to his friends or enemies, is wrote a review where he basically said this is a incredibly problematic political message, because he says this is a story about a bunch of people who say we are refugees from a war. It's a war that is caused by, sort of parallels of our Western society. And they're saying, please let us in. All we want is shelter and food, and we'll be really good. And the moment that we let them in, actually know they're horrible people who are going to destroy our civilization. And that the parallels with sort of, far right painting of refugees as, once they get here, they're going to be terrible and change our Christian values and all the rest of that.
Yeah.
The parallels are just, too strong to ignore. Now, a lot of fans make similar assumptions about a lot of Doctor Who. In most cases, the authors are dead and can't defend themselves. This is a terribly racist story, and the author can't go, well, no, it's not. That's the opposite of what I was trying to do. Whereas in this case, Gatiss is alive and well and loved by many, and he was able to say, oh my God, I had no idea. Well, obviously that's not what I do. And as is the case in a lot of Doctor Who stories where, we're trying to do some perhaps parallels and suddenly they're a bad guy. Well, it's because it's on at Saturday afternoon at dinner time and we need a monster. Why do the Gelths suddenly turn out to be evil and bad and dangerous? Because we want an exciting monster to wrap up the last part of the episode. So I think that's all Gatiss was trying, or I'm sure that's all Gatiss was trying to do, but it's an interesting window into the fact that I think he was so keen on writing that exciting adventure with a cool monster and walking corpses. It never occurred to him that he was, writing a polemic about the dangers of refugees.
Yeah, you can read stuff into anything if you really try. I think that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So we both liked it. You liked it more.
From the sounds of things, yes.
Well, let's kick on into his second episode. We're now into the David Tennant era, and that's The Idiot's Lantern. As you know, Rob, I've long been a bit of a fan of this one. I've long had a soft spot for it. When we talked about stories from each era to introduce someone to the show, The Idiot's Lantern was my go-to for the Tennant era, because I do think it's a very enjoyable story. Look, I don't think The Idiot's Lantern is a classic. I don't think it's The Impossible Planet. I don't think it's Human Nature. But I do think, and I found it again watching this, it's an enjoyable story that fills out its length in exactly the right way. It's got a start, it's got weird things happening, it's got the Doctor teaming up with a local schoolboy to investigate them, and then you've got a big, dramatic, action-packed finale. The alien is a different sort of thing that you would get in a piece of inventive Doctor Who. It's not something you get in most other TV series. You do get a little bit of message in there, and I'll come back to that after I've heard your thoughts, Rob. I did find the Doctor and Rose particularly smug and difficult in this.
Yeah.
I really struggled, particularly when she's correcting the guy about the Union Jack and is wrong. But fortunately, Rose loses her power to speak after 5 minutes, which maybe is another reason why I enjoy it so much. That's my opening bit on The Idiot's Lantern. Rob, where did you come?
Dave, it's one I didn't mind on release, but it's gone down for me since.
Okay.
Looking at it now, I think the era looks good on camera. I think The Wire is an interesting enemy. Magpie Electricals is a cool concept. And then there's the B-plot with Tommy and his family, Put together and baked, though, I don't think the cake quite rises in the middle. The faceless people feel a bit silly, the Doctor and Rose are obnoxious, and after an episode of building up Eddie as someone who is awful, and who his mother and Tommy must get away from, and indeed, they do get away from him, Dave, the Doctor then tells Tommy to keep Eddie in his life. Which seems like utterly terrible advice after everything we've been shown about Eddie. Maybe if he had some redeeming features and we're sort of on the fence and it's like, oh, well, he's so awful in this way, but oh, look, he's good in this way. Oh, yeah, okay, maybe that's good advice. But he's built up to have no such thing. He's built up to be a really, really rotten egg, Dave. And yet the Doctor tells Tommy, yeah, keep that guy in your life. That's a good idea. And I just think, no, that's a terrible idea.
Interesting point. I'll comment briefly on the faceless people, because I think this is one example where we need to remember it's 17 years ago. And I agree with you. When I watched it this time, I did look at that faceless person effect and thought, oh, that's a bit rough. That's a bit ropey.
Yeah.
And it would have been cutting edge at the time. And I think that's
reasonably,
Yeah, so that does date it a little bit. I think that the B-plot, as you call it, Rob, is interesting, because I think that having written a very straightforward adventure for his first episode, and really the whole of season 1 isn't getting too much into sort of the feels, if you like, in terms of sort of what the writers are putting in. There's obviously a bit of that, but not nearly as much as would come in later. I think having written that first one very safely, Gatiss is trying to work some message into this one, and it's worth pointing out that Gatiss is an openly gay writer. I think he's now got a husband.
Yes.
And I think that Tommy does feel like a bit of an avatar for Gatiss. Whether it's particularly reflective of his household growing up or not, I'm not quite sure. But certainly I think that there are insinuations there that Tommy is, if not gay, then he's certainly, a softer-souled, more sensitive boy.
Yeah, he's the mummy's boy in quotation marks.
Yeah, and there was certainly, I think that some of the comments the dad made about it were trying to point that to the audience in a way that those that would know would get it, and those that didn't, it would pass over them. So I think that you can read that in there, and maybe because Gatiss is making Tommy the avatar for him as the writer, he can't bring himself to not reconcile the family at the end of it.
Right.
And maybe also, again, because obviously, this is a gay writer writing for a gay producer and a gay showrunner. Maybe there is a sense of not wanting to leave any child who watches that and thinks, oh, I relate to that, with the message, well, if things aren't perfect, you've got to leave your family. And maybe they do want to sort of reassure them that actually, no, you can all get together and you can all still be a family. Maybe they felt that was a necessary message, even though I agree it's a little bit incongruous with what they've written so far.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to draw parallels to other horrible things that could happen in someone's life, and the person is told, no, stick together with that person, they're all right. In the long run, it'll work out great. It just strikes me as being so weird, but I think you could be right there. Maybe it is a better message for kids that running away maybe isn't the answer, because it sometimes isn't. But maybe he just shouldn't have been made out to be so awful, because that's the incongruous bit to me. Yeah,
I think that perhaps they've got to the end of the episode and realised they have to pull back, and then didn't reflect that across the episode. So I think this is an example of where, although I don't think it's, author's message stamped here in the way it was in St. Anthony's Fire, I think that it is a case of the author's message is seeping through the narrative and twisting that narrative in a way that isn't quite satisfactory. But that seems to have dragged it down more for you than me, because I really enjoyed this one.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Like I say, it's one I enjoyed at the time, but it's since then that it's gone down a bit for me.
No, fair enough. So that's one I've enjoyed a lot, and you've mostly enjoyed.
Yeah. Shall we move on to Victory of the Daleks?
Oh, yes, let's please.
Alrighty. Victory of the Daleks, Dave.
Back into the Smith era.
Yeah. My God, I thought this was stupid when I first saw it. And I see no reason to change my mind now. It's like parts of it came to Gatiss in a fever dream. Like, let's have Churchill. Let's have a Dalek that serves him tea. Wouldn't that be funny? Let's have the Dalek say, I am your servant, like in Power of the Daleks. Do you remember that one? Let's have Spitfires in space. Let's have new Daleks. What else? Let's have a robot professor. And the whole key to the story is convincing him he's human so he won't blow up. I mean, come on. All these little bits may be passable in isolation, but you stitch them together and this is just hot garbage, Dave. It's like, have we really fallen so far from the Unquiet Dead, at least for me? On a graph, these three stories are going downhill. If you graphed it for me, terrible. Absolutely terrible, this one.
It's interesting that this is the second time a showrunner has picked Mark Gatiss to write the third episode of their run.
Right, yep.
So he's obviously seen as being a safe pair of hands, even though he has only written 2 other episodes at this point of time. But Moffat clearly has a lot of faith in them. And look, we know behind the scenes they're very close friends. And I also had very dim memories of this one. I have seen it a couple of times, but I haven't seen it for quite a while. I agree, it's very clearly written by a fan. Mm-hmm. There are lots of nods, very knowing nods to fans that aren't in his previous episodes. I thought the first third of this was actually pretty good. I kind of liked the whole World War II setting. I liked the panic of the 11th Doctor when he sees the Daleks and he's trying to convince people that these aren't the Metaltrons or whatever they are. The Ironsides, sorry, I'm getting my Dalek nicknames mixed up. He's convincing them that they aren't the Ironsides. That's not too bad. The moment he goes up to the Dalek ship, mm-hmm. it does become a mess. I agree with you, the whole is less than the sum of its parts. I don't know whether there's a certain element of Gatiss was given a list of things he had to incorporate and he struggled to do that, particularly the reintroduction of the new Daleks that, look, we all know went nowhere, because that feels really forced and the whole episode just sort of stops while the Daleks announce that they're going to have a new paint job. It really does sort of throw things down, but at the same time you've got the Doctor sort of doing very doctorish stuff by pretending that a biscuit is a self-destruct mechanism, so there are nice little Gatiss-ish moments of humour, but the ending is woeful. The ending is just terrible. I think that it's clearly designed to be a fun romp, but the tone doesn't quite carry its way through all of that. That's my opening bit.
Yeah, look, I think here's one where we're maybe the closest so far in agreement, perhaps, on what we think of the episode. Would you agree with that based on what we've said?
Yeah, look, I think so. There's nothing you said that I particularly disagree with. I enjoyed the first third. I thought the rest was a hot mess. I do respect the fact that we finally just brought the Daleks back into the universe, and it did end that very long run over the RTD series of, this is the only Dalek left in the universe. No, actually, no, these are the only other Daleks left. And those Daleks are also in the universe. Oh, and they're, like, we sort of ended that, just that was becoming ridiculous.
Yeah.
And now they just said, right, the Daleks are now back.
Yeah.
So we don't have to explain the Daleks anymore. So look, it's got that positive. I think it's just tonally all over the shop. I don't know what Ian McNeice is going for as Churchill. I really don't. It's just a bizarre performance. You've got this really just kind of camp fun, bizarre, wacky, whatever word you want to use it, concept of the Danny Boy Spitfires intercut with a robot remembering its lost love and that's why it defuses the bomb. Mm-hmm. It's just tonally all over the shop, and I wonder if it is a bit of a reflection of Moffat still getting his feet under the desk as a showrunner, maybe. He clearly proved he could write a script. He wrote some great scripts in the lead up to being showrunner.
Yes.
Was he quite practiced in turning somebody else's script into a finished draft? Maybe not.
Yeah. The Bracewell thing at the end just... I think I almost threw something at the TV the first time I saw it. No, that's like, this is dumb. Oh my God. No. Just... Oh, no, I don't even want to think about it.
Yeah, and maybe if the whole thing had been done with a kind of wacky camp tone, and even there was a sort of a knowing look between the Doctor and the companions afterwards, it's like, well, that was ridiculous. Like,
yeah.
Maybe if we were sort of all in on the joke, it could have worked, but it's done, as I say, it's done really, really seriously, and it just doesn't work.
Yeah, and have we ever seen anything flop as bad in Doctor Who as those new Daleks, those new paradigm Daleks, as they called them? Like, they made toys of them, and clearly they thought they were onto a winner. Gatiss was out there at the time, I think, in interviews saying, yeah, we've made them really big, and they're menacing, and they're very colourful like the 60s films, and it's going to be amazing. And fandom as a whole just rejected them so completely. They were just, like, never seen again, maybe in the back shot of a few other episodes, when they brought together a whole bunch of Daleks or a whole bunch of baddies. Other than that, they flopped hard.
It's really incredible because many times I can think of fans on social media or forums, whatever the case may be, or the letters pages of DWB, there's always been things that fans have hated, and the production team has invariably just sort of gone, okay, that's just a very loud, noisy bunch of online fans or letter-writing fans. Who cares? The general public will love it.
Yep.
In this case, I don't know whether it's because the general public as well hated it and they had some feedback on that, or whether they just were a very new production team that thought, oh my God, we've upset the fans, stop! And maybe if they were, a year later into their time, they'd be a bit more confident and wouldn't have done that. I don't know, but it is just extraordinary. But they are pretty terrible.
Yeah. Should we move on to Night Terrors?
So I am fairly sure this is the first time I've watched Night Terrors since I watched it on broadcast.
Oh, really?
I went into this with absolutely no memories whatsoever, and it's terrible.
Yeah.
Nothing happens. Nothing happens. I was utterly bored. There was no plot. I think that the imagery is designed to be incredibly creepy and menacing and memorable.
Mm-hmm.
That's clearly what they were going for, and I just thought it looked kind of cheap and silly, and I was bored.
Mm-hmm.
I get what Gatiss was trying to do, but this to me should have been a horror novel.
Right.
I think that as a horror novel, where you can be very slow, very much focused on the tone and people just creeping around and sort of weird, menacing things happening, that in a book you can spend a lot of time talking about how weird it is and how dark it is outside and how it's making people feel. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't translate to television.
Yeah, this is one I'd never been on board with myself. I think back to the time this rolled around, which was 2011. We'd had 6 years of Gatiss at this point, and he'd done, as I say, quite well with the Unquiet Dead. Idiot's Lantern had gone down, Victory of the Daleks, you've just heard my thoughts on. So as soon as I saw the trailer for this with the creepy dolls, I was like, oh God, let's take a trip to Cliché City. I'm gonna hate this. And that's a shame in some ways, as the heart of this story is a horror story. So you're quite right to say, maybe this would do well as a horror novel. With a little boy who's scared of the dark, and being in a creepy doll's house feels quite right for Smithy's era. People talk about, well, they used to talk about at least, the fairy tale nature of Smithy's era. So it's on point for what the era feels like. These are all things I should latch onto, because I don't mind a bit of horror. I don't mind the fairy tale aspects, but I just don't. I'm not into it. I can't get past what feels like horror by numbers. It feels trope heavy. Yeah, I'm just not on board with this. Maybe not hating it as much as you, but certainly on that side of the ledger.
Interesting that you said the heart of this is the horror novel. I actually don't think that's the case. I think the heart of it is meant to be a very heartwarming story about a dad learning to love his adopted son.
Oh, so even getting sucked into the rug or the carpet? No, nothing like.
Well, I mean, because it ends with that whole lesson about I love you and I'll never abandon you, and I don't know whether there was something in Gatiss's life that particularly made him want to write that, or maybe Moffat wanted him to write that sort of a story, and was inspired by something. And look, I have heard people that have been new fathers saying that when they saw this as a new father, it really tugged at the heartstrings and meant something to them. So maybe there is some heart there that you and I are missing, but it is, I think. Yeah. I think that heart is the B, if not the C plot, and it is buried behind a lot of very, very boring walking around. And, even stuff like the moment where Amy's turned into a doll, well, dispassionately you can say, well, we know that Amy's not being written out, so who cares? And frankly, I loathe Amy so much that having her turned into a doll and not able to speak or act is, to me, a step up.
Yeah. So a bit of a stinker here, I think.
Yeah, we seem to be unanimous on that. I thought we might disagree on that one, but no, look, I think it's terrible.
Yeah. Oh, look, and it's fair for you to say that, because, like I just said, there are aspects of this that I should actually like, but I just don't.
Yes. Yeah, I thought this would be a lot more your vibe.
Yeah. Moving on to Cold War, Dave, I'd like to subtitle this one The Return of Mark Gatiss, because for me, aside from one aspect of the story, which I've mentioned several times over the years, I think this is really neat. I think the 80s setting is cool, and we have fun with it. We're doing a base under siege, essentially. Well, it's a submarine, but same thing. Clara plays a proper companion, not an I'm as good as the Doctor, me kind of person. And by making it a solo Ice Warrior adventure, we're in similar territory to Dalek back in Series 1. Obviously not by Gatiss, but a very popular story. All of this is great, and I do like the episode. The only blot on the paper here, I think, is, as I've mentioned on the podcast before, inventing that the Ice Warriors are really small little guys outside of the armour. That was never a thing in Doctor Who. It didn't sit well with me that he sort of rewrote Ice Warrior history, or wrote enough into it, new stuff into it, that it really jarred for me. And I didn't like that aspect at all. But overall, I think this is a really cool story.
I like the way you call it the return of Gatiss, because I think this is Gatiss returning to his roots a bit.
Oh.
After a couple of episodes where he has tried to insert some message or some heart or some of his sort of approach to writing, he's gone very traditional. Mm-hmm. He has just said, right, let's do a base under siege.
Yeah.
Let's find an isolated place that we can't escape from. Let's put a classic monster into it, and let's just do that. Let's just have fun. And I think that it really works. This is, for me, one of the stronger episodes of its era. I think it's a really good run around. I enjoyed it watching it this time. We need to note in passing, it is superbly well cast, in part by accident. Mm-hmm. I don't think they quite knew that a number of people they cast would become significantly bigger names by the time, a few years had rolled around. So they did get it, although it's disappointing Josh O'Connor was killed after about the first 5 minutes. But I was like, oh, wow, that's Josh O'Connor. Oh, he's dead.
Yeah.
So that's really good. I agree with you. My exact note here, Rob. Ice Warrior is good, but the whole getting out of its shell is a wank.
That's one way to put it. Yep.
Look. I'm not nearly as angry about that as you are. I kind of get what they were trying to do. They were trying to do for the Ice Warriors what they've done for other returning monsters and put a modern day twist on it. So I get it. I think it's a bit of a wank, but I get it. I'm not angry about it. I still think it lacks an ending. Mm. I can remember thinking at the time when the Ice Warrior flying saucer rocks up going, oh, cool, this is what the last 10 or 15 minutes is going to be. We've had all the lead up with one Ice Warrior and setting up that they're really badass, and we're going to do all that. Oh, now we're going to have the final confrontation with a bunch of Ice Warriors, of course. Oh no, he's just gone. Yeah, that's it. Oh, we're done. Okay. It really does feel like either he ran out of time or they ran out of budget, and so we've sort of got that. It really feels like a real sort of tacked on joke ending. Can we get a lift?
Yeah.
I reckon that was pared back for time or budget reasons. But no, look, this is fun.
Yeah.
This is good. This was better than I remembered it, and I remembered it pretty well.
Very good. Shall we move on to the next?
This is one that I know a lot of fans are big fans of. That's the Crimson Horror. Mm-hmm. And when it was first on, I was very excited by it because it had, of course, Diana Rigg, who was fantastic in The Great Muppet Caper and probably some other stuff as well. So once again, this is the second time I've watched this episode. I haven't seen it since broadcast. And I don't get it. I don't get it at all. My main feeling with this one was boredom. It takes a lot of time to really get the story going. I think Diana Rigg is doing something. Not sure what, but it's something. The sort of revelation that Mr. whatever his name was a slug, kind of, I didn't see that it was coming that it was going to be a slug, but it was very clearly not going to be a real person. It was very unsubtly set up. I think that if Cold War was him returning to traditional Doctor Who, this is him returning to his love of horror. And there is a lot of horror in this. There is a lot of grimace in this. There is a lot of the Grand Guignol in this, with people being changed colour and horrible mystery stuff and murders. But none of it really kind of leapt out at me. And once again, I think it lacked plot. And it lacked something for me to latch onto. So I was frankly bored through the Crimson Horror. Rob, Where do you sit?
I think you're right about Gatiss going back to something he loves. Obviously, it's the Victorian era and probably what you could call penny dreadful type stories.
Yeah.
And he's kind of doing a pastiche of those. But for me, Knock Me Down with a Feather, Dave, because it's the second Gatiss story in a row that I think worked really well in this list, and which I enjoy. I think a big part of that is the light touch and the comedy vibe of the piece. And when you're doing that kind of story that's light and has comedy, you can throw in Strax and Jenny and Vastra, who are characters that I'm not really on board with all the time, but it feels right here. And you said it in Victorian times, and Gatiss does seem to be in his happy place when you're in Victorian times. And you make it Dr. Light, because it is, I would call this a Dr. Light. I'm not sure if everyone would, but I'd call it Dr. Light.
Yeah, he's not there until halfway through, so yeah.
And it gives it a different vibe. You've got Diana Rigg playing the villain, and that's so fun. So I liked this a lot on debut, and I still actually like it now. And to do a callback to something I was saying about the Idiot's Lantern, back in Idiot's Lantern where Tommy is told to still stay in touch with his total shit of a dad, here Ada is allowed to be angry and stay angry with her mother, even when the mother's dead, even when Mrs. Gilliflower is dead. The Doctor sort of gives her permission to be like that. Doesn't sort of say, oh, you should, think kindly of your old mum. There's none of that. So it's almost the opposite to what happens in The Idiot's Lantern, just to tie those two stories together. But across the board, I like this. I think it's fun.
That's really interesting. Look, we've talked about the fact that you like Victoriana more than I do, and okay, that's fine. That's a reason for you to like this more than I do. It's interesting when you said this has got a lot of comedy in it. I was very tempted to sort of do the whole really where, but look, I'll make the more sensible point, which is you're probably right. The problem with comedy is that it's a spectrum that different people get in different ways, and it really hadn't occurred to me that this was a comedy until you just said it then. But then as I'm listening to you talk and you say, "Oh, Mrs. Gilliflower," I'm like, her name's Gilliflower. Mm-hmm. Of course this is a comedy. It's clearly meant to be silly.
Yeah.
I didn't notice that as I was watching it. I didn't find it funny. I didn't laugh at it. I was just sort of bored by it. So is this a case of where my failure on the humour spectrum has just been, this has just gone completely over my head?
As loath as I am to call it a failure, I think that the different ways we've watched it do probably contribute to how we find it. Yeah, because it is intended to be a comedy for sure. I think it's a send-up of a Penny Dreadful sort of thing.
Yeah, and maybe my lack of familiarity with Penny Dreadfuls means that I didn't quite get what he was riffing on, so I didn't see it as a send-up. I just thought it as a really bad plot.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
Bad Doctor Who episode, yeah.
Yeah, because you saw it for... you saw what it was satire and gone, that's a really clever satire. I've just gone, what's it doing?
Yeah, I think that could be the difference here.
Okay, so that's one we have had quite a different view on.
Very different. Now, moving on, Robot of Sherwood is Gatiss's next. And this is an interesting one, Dave, insofar as when it aired, I wasn't on board. Because funnily enough, given what we've just said, the comedy angle here didn't feel right to me. I felt I was rolling my eyes all the way through the piece. And then it has that ridiculous arrow shot at the end, and I was just like, what is this junk? But on rewatch, a year or two later, and any other time I've rewatched it, like for this episode, I felt completely differently. I enjoyed the humour. I got into the story. And I felt like it was actually even trying to say something. It wasn't just it's a pastiche of a Penny Dreadful like the previous story. I think this was comedy that had a point. And I think it's trying to say something in the parallels it makes between the Doctor and Robin and the ways, well, they're both fictional, aren't they, really? And,
yes.
and they both inspire people and all of that sort of side street, So I've basically done a 180 on this. I think it's funny and I think there's more to it than I first saw. Before I hand over to you, though, I will comment, I'm still annoyed at the edit to the episode where we don't see the sheriff lose his head and reveal that he's a robot. And for people who don't remember this, the week this episode was going out, Daesh had beheaded someone, or at least put out the video of them beheading someone. And the Doctor Who production office sort of went, ooh, we can't do a show where someone loses their head in a week that someone's lost their head for real in the news. And I argued at the time that that sort of thing would be quickly forgotten, and indeed is long forgotten now. It might even be news to people listening to this podcast. Not to mention that the audience would be mature enough to know that a robot losing its head in a show made many months earlier obviously wasn't a comment or a riff on the news of that week. But the edit was made, and so now, forevermore, the episode is lumbered without the big reveal, which was kind of important, and it makes an early line in the piece that the sheriff feels like half a machine. That just sounds weird now, because that goes nowhere without the big reveal. I've probably laboured this point a little too much, but it is something that annoys me about the story. But overall, this is one I did a complete 180 on. I've gone from this is junk to I really quite like this.
I'm glad you took the time to explain that, Rob, because I must admit I did remember that was the case, but I hadn't realised until you reminded me that it actually was a fairly big edit. It was a change of plot rather than just a scene cut. Because my memory was that it was a scene cut. And I was watching this going, where did they cut a scene? It doesn't seem to be a missing scene. But yeah, it actually wasn't just a cut. It was a remake, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's interesting. This is one I've seen several times since broadcast, because this has long been part of a little trilogy of episodes that I love that really made me fall in love with Peter Capaldi as the 12th Doctor. Robot of Sherwood, Listen and Time Heist were 3 episodes that I just loved so much when they went out. Having really disliked Capaldi's first episode, and particularly hated Into the Dalek. I loathe Into the Dalek.
Mm-hmm.
But after this, liking them, going, oh no, please don't tell me I'm not going to like this Doctor. I fell in love with him in Robot of Sherwood, and then Listen, Time Heist was just a wonderful trilogy where I really fell in love with Capaldi. So I'm very, very fond of this episode. Always have been. And if there was humour in the Crimson Horror that missed me, the humour in Robot of Sherwood absolutely landed for me. And I just get the tone it's going for. And when you are resonating with an episode in the way I did with this, everything now works. You love every performance. You love every joke. I loved every shot of every leaf that was so lovingly done and just looked luscious and enjoyable, and the sunship streaming through, and everything in this just works for me. I think Capaldi is great. There are little moments of his, as in Gatiss's fandom, coming through. I think that him... The Doctor going around, stealing people's shoes to analyse his very moon base. I'm sure that's not a coincidence.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So I just think this is great fun, and Gatiss is a fun writer, and Gatiss is a fun person. When you see Gatiss interviewed, whether it's on a Doctor Who commentary or interviewed for a movie he's making or a film he's writing or something like that, when you see him interviewed, he's clearly a very fun guy. Yeah. He's got that twinkle in the eye where you always know there's something a little bit mischievous around the corner no matter what's happening. And I think he's put himself into this script and it works. He's unencumbered, he's relaxed, and I felt relaxed and I was just comfortable watching it.
Yeah, and absolutely the comedy is different to the comedy in the Crimson Horror. Absolutely different, but still comedy.
Yeah, and perhaps different because we got 2 very different actors, and Peter Capaldi obviously coming off the thick of it. We know exactly what sort of a comedic actor he was, and the production team knew exactly what sort of comedic chops he has, and they've written it to him, and he is brilliant in this. Absolutely brilliant. I think he just nails it.
Oh, even when he puts on the glove and he's giving the finger to Robin. It's very subtle, but it's there. Yeah,
no. There are some great lines. So look, I've always loved this one and I still do.
Brilliant. Shall we move on to Sleep No More?
Yeah, so I watched Sleep No More a couple of nights ago. Unlike Robot of Sherwood, this is not one I've gone back to, and this is again one that I'm watching for only the second time for this podcast. Mm-hmm. And as I put it on, I thought, okay, it's time to do Sleep No More. Mm-hmm. Everybody knows this is the bad one. Everybody knows no one likes this one, although it's a Gatiss one, so it has got fans, because every Gatiss one is somebody's favourite.
Yeah.
And I'm sort of watching the first 2 or 3 minutes and I'm going, wow, this is an amazing tense, pacey opening. Oh, this is cool. And then I'm watching the first 10 minutes and going, well, this is really good. Like, when does it get terrible? And then I'm watching 15 minutes and going, this is quite exciting. And the found footage motif is not nearly as annoying as I remember it. When does it get terrible? And then I'm sort of watched 20 minutes and thought, this is really good. Then I got to 22 minutes and it went terrible.
Halfway through.
Look, I said that partly for comic effect. There is a point kind of where we're introduced properly to the plot, where I think this does start to come apart at the seams a bit, which is a shame. I think that the first 20 minutes, I was really surprised at how much I enjoyed it. It's pacey, it's tense. As I say, I didn't mind the found footage. We'll see from your comment if you felt the same. Once it starts to get into the plot, I just have no idea what the hell was going on. I genuinely don't. I've seen it twice. I was looking out for that this time because I remembered last time going, I don't know what's going on. And so I was actively trying to find out what was going on this time. I was alert for plot. And it's there, but it just makes no sense to me. The ending makes no sense to me. The fact the Doctor just sort of buggers off in the TARDIS and then the invasion of wherever they're invading is successful. I'm not sure. Like, I'm not sure whether that's meant to be the point. It's a really like, oh my God, the invasion succeeded this week, folks. Or whether I'm missing something as well. It's not nearly as bad as I remembered. I remembered it being abysmal. I enjoyed the first half and then the plot fell apart, but I didn't hate it.
Okay. How to begin?
At the very beginning.
Yeah. Just as I had a run of 3 Gatiss stories I really liked, we arrive here at Sleep No More. So that probably tells you what I think of it. I still feel that it's an experiment that doesn't work. Like, found footage movies are interesting. Let's do a found footage episode. And if I'm kind, it does kind of give us this view of the Doctor and companion from other people's perspectives, which is generally something that works well in shows. I think of that Next Gen episode, Lower Decks, that casts the regulars in a different light, because we're sort of seeing it partially through these younger guys, eyes.
Yeah, a favourite of mine, I'll just say.
Yeah, favourite of many people for Next Gen. But I digress, probably because I don't want to talk about Sleep No More. The backstory to the monsters is silly. The monsters look silly. And the story is really just a big runaround. I just don't like it. Again, it's an experiment, and experiments can be cool. I get that. Sometimes you do something experimental and it's just awesome. But this isn't that for me. It still doesn't work for me. I get why you might think it's better this time around. I think it's the same effect as when we rewatched Jodie, and without the pressure of it being the story of the week, we could sort of see better things in Jodie episodes. It may be a bit of that. I don't want to speak for you, though, but it may be a bit of that. I just think this is dire, and I think its reputation is deserved.
I'm glad you mentioned it being an experiment, and I was going to make the point, love it or hate it, I give it credit for trying to do something a bit different. I think that it's good when Doctor Who tries to mix things up a bit, and in Gatiss's 8th episode, you really feel like he's trying to mix it up, and what we're 5 series into Moffat's showrunner time, so
yeah.
I think they're both reaching for something different, and I commend them for it, whether it works for you or not. I don't think it is necessarily the Jodie thing, because if that was the case, I probably would have liked Crimson Horror and the other one whose name I can't even remember, Night Terrors. I would have liked them a lot more. I didn't. This one, I genuinely really enjoyed the first half. I think that part of it is that I went into it knowing it was a found footage thing and prepared for that to not work. And then when it kind of did work, I thought, yeah, okay, that's not a problem. So that maybe did help a bit, as opposed to the first time I've watched where I'm going like, what is this? Like, when do we get to normal cameras? And it's not just a found footage, because there is that whole twist in the fact that, you're not wearing a helmet. So it's recording units through the sleep and all the rest of it. So there was a plot point to the gimmick, which I'll give it credit for. I don't have anything much more to add. I thought this was much better than I remembered, even though it does completely go off a cliff at about the 22-minute mark, and the last 5 minutes is just... I was still sitting there going, what?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
So it's not a, it's not going to be in my top three. That's the first spoiler I'll give for the end of this. It's not in my top three.
Safe to say. Okay.
But it was better than I remembered.
Okay. Well, let's move on to the Empress of Mars, which is Gatiss's final slice of Doctor Who to date, at least. He may come back to the show, who knows. And I find this one curious in the sense that Gatiss has taken a lot of elements that seem really cool and interesting and again thrown them together much like the Idiot's Lantern. And again, they don't rise for me. I mean, he's got ice warriors. I love ice warriors. And he's got Victorian soldiers on Mars when no one listening to this podcast will actually know this because I've never spoken about it. But I used to really love a role-playing game called Space 1889, which was all about Victorians in space. So I'm really on board with the idea of having redcoats on other planets, right? I absolutely get it. I love it. I've played a role-playing game about it. I do wonder whether Gatiss might even know Space 1889 himself, the way he took this story. But when I watch it, I just feel something's missing. It's competent, sure, solid, maybe. I have nothing to really rag on it for, but again, I don't think it's anything special either. So perhaps, at long last in this list, for me at least, it's a non-Marmite Gatiss episode. It's just, yeah, that's all right.
I'm a little bit better disposed to it than you. This is one of those episodes where sometimes you have an episode that you've got a lot of good points to make, but then there's a big thing that sort of offsets that. This isn't that. This is one of those things. I think the central concept is really strong. The direction's really strong. The production's really strong. It's a good, fun episode, but it's just got a few little things that chip away at my liking.
Right.
I think the chatty Ice Warrior doesn't quite work for me, and maybe that's me bringing my classic fan love of the Ice Warriors into it, where I'm like, this guy's very chatty for an Ice Warrior. Ice Warriors don't chat. That was just a little sort of niggle for me. I think that this is a return of Gatiss trying to make a bit of a social comment. I think he's trying to do a bit of a riff on colonialism thing here. Look, I don't think that's a particularly profound statement to make. Some of it works really well. A couple of times he does lean into, hey everyone, look at my very cool social commentary I'm making about colonialism. Colonialism is bad,
Mm-hmm.
It's not a big deal, it's not a big problem, but it just sort of chips away at my liking a little bit. But look, otherwise I think it's a really fun episode. It doesn't outstay its welcome.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at this point he certainly knows how to fill exactly the right runtime very well. And let's face it, he's always filled out his runtime neatly, whether it worked for you or not. Yeah. He knows how to write television.
Oh, yes.
And so I think this was just good.
Okay. Dave, before we get to our top and bottom threes, I've got 3 Gatiss extras to throw at you. You started this by talking about his novels. I've got some extras to throw at you.
Oh, excellent. I have a minor one myself, but I'll hear your 3.
Okay. During the pre-production of Series 4, Gatiss allegedly, well, actually more than allegedly, we know this because it's commented about in the Writer's Tale book, Gatiss pitched a story to RTD involving the Natural History Museum being invaded by Nazis and aliens, and it would apparently be a bit of an Indiana Jones sort of runaround with, lots of corridors and the occult and obviously Nazis and such. And RTD wrote in the Writer's Tale that the Gatiss story was up against James Moran's The Fires of Pompeii. And we all obviously know Fires of Pompeii got the chocolates. So we never got to see this Indiana Jones-inspired Gatiss story. Would you have enjoyed that, possibly?
Oh, look, I love the Natural History Museum, so yeah, I would have been keen to see that for sure.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. That's one of my episodes that didn't happen. Another episode that did happen is, of course, An Adventure in Space and Time, and I think we should touch on this briefly because I still find it's remarkable that this got made at all. I know the 50th anniversary was a big deal for Doctor Who. I know Doctor Who was and is a big show, but I still find it extraordinary that they made a telemovie about Verity Lambert and William Hartnell and people like this back in 1963 making Doctor Who. And of course, Gatiss is responsible for this, and hats off to him for it.
Yeah, I remember seeing that when it came out. It was one of my top 3 highlights of the 50th anniversary at the time. I thought it was an absolutely gorgeous piece of television. I've soured on it a bit as I've really come to appreciate how much of it is just actually historical nonsense. And I think that's a great shame because a lot of fans will see it as being accurate. They'll sort of go, oh, I saw it in an adventure in space and time. This is what... Like, no, that's nothing like that actually happened, which is a great shame. Although it is interspersed with some factual scenes. The scene where Sidney Newman talks William Hartnell back down off the ledge is apparently a verbatim account of something that did happen, for example. But most of it is historically dubious, if not made up. I think that's a shame because it's a gorgeous piece of television.
Oh, but look, a lot of biopics are like that. I've made a YouTube video. I was reading Robbie Krieger's biography, his autobiography, Robbie Krieger from The Doors. And there's a chapter where he listed about 7 or 10, I can't remember, things in the Oliver Stone Doors movie that never actually happened. And I ran through them in the video and put corresponding footage to them. And I made the comment in that video that, people will watch the Doors movie even now, let alone in 10 or 20 years' time, and think, oh, that's what happened. That's what a Doors concert looked like, or that's factual. When, like, one of them was, in the movie, they play a gig in San Francisco in 1968, and Robbie Krieger says, we didn't play a gig in 1968 in that city at all. And we certainly didn't play one at nighttime with a bonfire and naked people running around the bonfire. It's like, but that will become people's view of reality. And it's the same with this adventure in space and time. There will be elements of it that are completely fictional, but people will be like, oh, that's what happened. That's what Hartnell said. So I hear you.
Yeah, that's fair.
And quickly, finally, instead of the Empress of Mars, Gatiss was actually thinking of making a follow-up to Sleep No More, believe it or not.
Yes, I have heard that.
Yeah. It never got very far, so I think it was going to be similar sort of effects just playing out, on a more of a planet-wide scale, maybe on a bigger scale, but it didn't really get very far in the writing. I think he sort of maybe pitched the idea, possibly half-heartedly given the response to the original story, and it just went nowhere, and he ended up writing The Empress of Mars. But I just thought I'd mention that too, that was on the cards at one time.
Yeah, and look, I could certainly believe that he intended to do that given how open-ended the episode actually is. And look, just while we're talking about other things, we made the choice that this was about Mark Gatiss, the writer, so we obviously haven't mentioned his several appearances as an actor in Doctor Who, but he's obviously an actor and writer and a lot of other stuff. And I just want to give a very passing shout-out to his performance as Peter Mandelson in the TV movie Coalition, where he is absolutely brilliant, and I think he was just born to play Peter Mandelson.
Oh, very good. He was very good in Game of Thrones as well.
Sure.
Back when Game of Thrones was good.
It was? Cool.
Originally, yes. Dave, shall we move on to our top and bottom 3?
Yes, I think we should. And why don't you go first?
With my top or my bottom?
Whichever you feel you want to run with.
Well, you always like to end on a high, so why don't I start with the bottom?
Okay.
And here, Dave, I'm going from my third worst to my all-time worst.
Understood.
So at number 3, I'm going with Night Terrors. It's not egregious, but I'm not on board with it either. At number 2, Victory of the Daleks. Just a stupid thing. And at number 1, no surprises here from me, Sleep No More. Absolutely woeful. And that was quite an easy bottom 3 to pick, actually.
Interesting. We have 2 snaps, which is more than I maybe expected going into this.
Okay.
But our order is different. I have Victory of the Daleks at number 3, as in the third worst. I think that it's got some good moments, but overall it just doesn't stand up as a piece of coherent television. At number 2, probably no shock having listened to the episode, I've gone with Crimson Horror. I know a lot of fans love it. It doesn't work for me at all. And look, I think it is one of the most Marmite of the Gatiss episodes. And the worst episode that I think Mark Gatiss wrote is Night Terrors, because I thought it was terrible.
Yeah, very good. We agreed more than I thought too, actually.
We did, which is interesting.
Dave, let's talk top 3.
Yes.
And in a similar running order, third through to my all-time top story. My top 3 would be Robot of Sherwood at 3, The Unquiet Dead at 2, and The Crimson Horror at 1. And even from random comments we've had on Twitter this week, I know some listeners will be stamping their phones into the dirt about now and shouting, "You finished, Irwin, you bloody bastard," And others will be punching the sky and cheering those choices. And I think that's Mark Gatiss' stories for you. It's quite extraordinary, especially as he's a non-showrunner.
Yeah, well, look, as I predicted, we have got one of my bottom three in your top three. So that goes to show something's going on there. We only had one snap in our tops.
There you go.
My third best Gatiss story was Cold War. Just a good, fun adventure, a great base under siege. Number 2, I know it's not one of your favourites, Rob, but I had to have the Idiot's Lantern in there. I just think it's a really enjoyable adventure with some good ideas and some depth. But our snap was Robot of Sherwood. You had it third, I had it 1. That's an extraordinarily fun adventure, and that's the one I would show someone to show what Mark Gatiss can do as a writer.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I might do that too if I'm ever in that position, because it is just fun.
Yeah, my biggest surprise is that Sleep No More did not make my bottom 3.
I'm surprised by that as well.
I think a few people will be. So, look, listeners, we would love to hear your top and bottom lists, because we really do want to test this theory that people have very different views on the Gatiss episodes. So tweet us, message us, email us, and we'll have a look and test that. But that's what we thought.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun to go through.
Yeah, it was. I'm glad I rewatched all of those. Even the ones I didn't enjoy, I'm glad I've seen them again.